Our story begins with a girl named Mi-onam, a girl who never, ever shows the world her face. She walks around with a cardboard box on her head, and she flatly refuses to step outside her house. If you saw her today, you'd probably think she was strange, maybe even a little mysterious. But she wasn't always like this. Years ago, back when Mi-onam was still in school, she gathered every ounce of courage she had and confessed her feelings to a boy she liked with her whole heart. Her love was innocent, pure, completely sincere. She hoped he'd respect her feelings, even if he didn't return them. Instead of answering with kindness, that boy rejected her in the cruelest way imaginable. He mocked her looks in front of everyone, called her ugly, and burst out laughing right in her face. And here's the part that hurt even more. The rest of the class started laughing right along with him. The laughter that started in that classroom followed her all the way down the hallways. Whispers chased her everywhere she went, and before she knew it, Mi-onam had become the laughingstock of the entire school. That day, she went home in tears and collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her whole body shook from the pain and humiliation. In a fit of grief and heartbreak, she smashed everything in her room and screamed that she would never, ever leave the house again. And she meant it. For nearly an entire year, Mi-onam didn't step outside even once. The outside world had become nothing but a place of rejection, shame, and fear. Turns out heartbreak makes for a great interior decorator. Nothing says "I'm fine" quite like demolishing your own bedroom. Then, one quiet afternoon, while she was playing with a balloon in her room, it slipped out the window by accident. Without thinking twice, she rushed outside to grab it back. That's when she noticed a young man standing nearby, offering to help her, gently and kindly. His voice was soft, his intentions completely innocent. But the moment a stranger appeared in front of her, all her old fear came rushing back. In a panic, she grabbed a paper box lying near the trash and jammed it onto her head to hide her face. Strangely enough, inside that box, she felt safe, like she'd finally hidden herself from the judgment of the world. The young man just stood there, confused, before eventually walking away. But from that day on, Mi-onam decided she would never show her face to anyone again. That box slowly became her shield against the entire world. Years passed, and Mi-onam stayed locked away inside her house, avoiding reality completely. But online, her personality was a whole different story. Hiding behind a fake identity, she made plenty of friends on social media. Nobody there knew what she looked like. Nobody could judge her appearance. Online, people only saw her kindness, her humor, her real personality. For the first time, she felt like someone actually accepted her exactly as she was on the inside. And so, for years, she lived a double life, hiding from the real world while opening up freely in the virtual one. But a life built on hiding never stays hidden forever. Mi-onam's father was deeply pained watching his daughter's condition. Seeing her locked in her room day after day broke his heart. She never spoke to anyone in real life and spent her entire day glued to social media. Loneliness was slowly eating her alive from the inside. Desperate to help his daughter, her father went to see a therapist and asked for a solution. The doctor explained that her condition wasn't dangerous, but it was definitely serious. She needed communication, family interaction, and above all, exposure to the outside world. If she kept avoiding life like this, her condition would only get worse. Nothing says healthy coping mechanism like trading your actual face for a cardboard one. At least the box never laughed at her. To change his daughter's life, her father made a bold decision. He enrolled Mi-onam in the very same school her brother attended. Coming home, he told her firmly that starting the very next morning, she'd be going to school. This time, there was no room for negotiation. Hearing this, Mi-onam was completely shocked. She screamed that she hated people, that she wasn't going anywhere, and that she was perfectly happy living with a box on her head. She insisted that if she went to school looking like this, everyone would mock her all over again. Her father gently tried to remove the box, but Mi-onam screamed and cried, refusing to let it go, begging him not to send her to school. Still, her father held firm to his decision. A little while later, her brother walked into her room carrying a brand new box. Unlike the old, battered one, this new box was clean and carefully made. He told her lovingly that this box would suit her better. Slowly, Mi-onam removed the old box, and her face came into view. She was delicate, naturally beautiful, but instead of confidence in her eyes, there was only doubt. Through her tears, she asked her brother if she was really ugly. Despite being so beautiful, her confidence had been completely destroyed. Her brother comforted her, telling her she wasn't ugly at all. He promised he'd always be by her side at school and would protect her. He also warned her that there were some dangerous troublemakers at school, so she needed to be careful. That night, brother and sister sat together decorating the new box with colors and drawings. By the time they finished, the box looked bright, unique, and absolutely adorable. It wasn't just a box anymore. It had become something special, uniquely hers. The next morning, Mi-onam walked into school wearing that same decorated box. Her legs were trembling, and she braced herself for the worst. The moment the students saw her, everyone stared in confusion. Whispers started immediately, and a few students began laughing. All her old memories of humiliation came flooding back. Her heart pounded rapidly. Everything in front of her eyes blurred, and the anxiety nearly made her faint. In the middle of all this, she accidentally bumped into a boy wearing a helmet. His name was Menton. Unlike the other students, he didn't laugh at her. He tried to politely introduce himself, wanting to get to know the new student. But Mi-onam assumed he'd mock her too, so she quickly walked away. Menton wasn't the type to give up easily. He followed her and properly introduced himself, explaining that he was also a student at the school. Before their conversation could go any further, Mi-onam bumped into another student, this one named Zero, the leader of the school's most feared gang. Mi-onam immediately apologized, explaining it was an accident. But Zero wasn't satisfied with her apology. He demanded she remove her box so he could see exactly who had the nerve to bump into him. Mi-onam refused outright, her voice trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. That's when Menton stepped between them, angrily telling Zero to leave her alone. Terrified, Mi-onam moved closer to Menton for protection. Menton led her away, saving her from humiliation once again. Later in class, the teacher asked Mi-onam to introduce herself as the new student. She spoke nervously while the rest of the class kept whispering and laughing. Menton watched her, and it was obvious he didn't like their behavior one bit. At lunchtime, Mi-onam tried to eat alone, but a group of students surrounded her and tried to yank the box off her head. She screamed and ran off to sit somewhere by herself. A little later, Menton came and sat beside her, wearing his own helmet, too, so Mi-onam wouldn't feel alone or singled out. That quiet gesture comforted her deeply. Menton realized she hadn't eaten because of the bullying, so he brought her food, and the two of them quietly ate together. Bit by bit, he tried to earn her trust. Menton asked her to take off the box and show her face, but Mi-onam refused. She explained that she was ugly and that she'd been locked inside her house for 3 years because of her looks. Her father had forced her to come to school. She believed her appearance meant she'd never make a single friend. After thanking him for the food, she told him she wouldn't be coming back to school and started to leave. Menton gently stopped her and said she had to come back. He'd wait for her the next day, because now they were friends. The word friends shook something loose in her heart. Despite everything she'd told him, Menton still wanted to be around her. For the first time, a small spark of happiness lit up inside her. Turns out the fastest way to make a friend in high school is getting punched in the ego by the school bully. Results may vary, insurance not included. After Mi-onam left, Menton confronted Zero over the bullying, and the two of them got into a fierce fight. By coincidence, Mi-onam happened to walk by and saw them fighting because of her. At that same moment, word of the disturbance reached the police, and officers started heading toward the school. Zero suddenly grabbed Mi-onam's hand and dragged her off to a secluded spot where no one could see them. Furious, she demanded to know why he'd been fighting with her friend and why he'd dragged her there against her will. Without any warning, Zero lifted the box off her head. For the first time, he saw her face clearly. Stunned by her beauty, he froze completely. But Mi-onam misread his expression entirely. All she could think of was that boy from her past, the cruel laughter, the insults from her classmates. She assumed Zero would react the exact same way. Overwhelmed by fear and painful memories, she fainted. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital room, and the box was gone from her head. Seeing this, she panicked and started screaming, demanding her box back. The doctors tried to calm her down, but she was shaking so badly that she simply couldn't face the world without it. Her father, racked with guilt, apologized to her. He told her she never had to go back to school again. He couldn't bear to see his daughter like this. But this time Mi-onam surprised him. Through her tears, she said she wouldn't hide anymore. She would go back to school. Not because anyone was forcing her this time, but because she wanted to face that gang and reclaim her dignity. The next day, Zero sat alone, thinking about Mi-onam. The memory of her face kept replaying in his mind. He couldn't forget her beauty, and he didn't even understand what was happening to him. Then Mi-onam appeared in front of him, wearing a mask and dark glasses. Without hesitation, she scolded him for what he'd done and slapped him across the face. Zero's friends stepped forward to defend him, but he immediately stopped them. He told Mi-onam she could slap him again if she wanted. No one would dare touch her. Shocked by his reaction, she walked away. Zero followed her and asked her to remove the mask and glasses, saying he wanted to see her face again. Furious, Mi-onam told him to stay away, but he kept insisting. That's when Menton showed up. Mi-onam immediately complained that Zero had taken off her box the day before and was now trying to remove her mask too. Hearing this, Menton lunged at Zero again, and another violent fight broke out between them. Mi-onam stepped in to stop them, crying and asking why both of them wanted to destroy her life. Wasn't she already broken enough? Menton demanded to know why Zero kept bothering her. Zero was on the verge of telling the truth, that he was drawn to her, that all he wanted was to see her eyes again, but his pride stopped him. Instead of the truth, he cruelly said Mi-onam was completely unattractive. His words cut through her like blades. All her painful memories came rushing back at once. Crying, she collapsed into emotional shock again. Menton carefully picked her up and carried her away. Nothing screams romantic interest quite like calling someone ugly to protect your own ego. Truly, chivalry took the day off. That night, Mi-onam locked herself in her room. She messaged her online friends and told them everything that had happened. She repeated the same belief she'd held onto for years, that she was unwanted, unattractive. She kept crying and refused to leave her room or return to school. Menton couldn't ignore her silence. He went to her house to check on her, but her father, furious and protective, blamed him entirely for the situation and warned him to stay away from his daughter, then shut the door in his face. Still, Menton didn't give up. The next day, he came back again and found that Mi-onam still wasn't doing any better. He knew how much she loved food, so he left her favorite meal outside her door. When Mi-onam opened it, Menton gently stepped inside and told her he'd brought her something special. He handed her a new handmade box, shaped like a duck. It was bright, adorable, and beautiful. Seeing it, for the first time in days, happiness appeared in her eyes. Menton told her he'd made it just for her, and that he'd wear a matching duck helmet too, so Mi-onam would never feel alone. The two of them ate together wearing their matching duck outfits, celebrating that small, happy moment. Menton confessed that the entire week she'd been gone, he'd missed her terribly. He asked her to come back to school and promised he'd be by her side at all times. Slowly, Mi-onam agreed. The next morning, Menton picked her up on his motorcycle and took her to school. Meanwhile, Zero started reflecting on his own behavior. He realized he couldn't keep hurting people forever. He claimed his friends often stirred up trouble and then pinned the blame on him. In frustration, he snapped at his own friends and warned them to change their behavior. When Mi-onam saw him getting aggressive again, she told him that if he truly wanted to change, he had to give up violence completely. Zero said he'd do anything for her, but on one condition, that she show him her face once more. Hearing his request, all her old memories came flooding back. She stood there silent for a long time. Zero mistook her silence for rejection and started getting angry. But then, in front of everyone, Mi-onam stepped forward and removed the box. With trembling eyes, she said she hoped Zero was satisfied now. The entire crowd fell silent. At that exact moment, Zero publicly announced that he was leaving the gang. He said he'd never bully anyone again, and he apologized to everyone he'd ever hurt. Afterward, Menton saw Mi-onam standing there without her box, tears streaming down her face. He was stunned. Mi-onam ran into his arms, crying, saying that Zero had seen her ugly face. Menton held her tightly and told her everything would be okay. She wasn't alone, and he'd never leave her side. Back home, when Mi-onam told her father everything, he listened carefully and then showed her something surprising. Her photos were circulating online, and in the comments, people were calling her cute, sweet, beautiful. Her father had her look in the mirror and told her to say out loud that she was beautiful. He explained that real glow comes from confidence. That night, Mi-onam sat quietly in her room. Suddenly, she heard a noise near the window. Her heart started racing with fear. She thought maybe a thief had broken in. But when the window opened, it was Zero standing there. Shocked, Mi-onam started to scream, but Zero gently covered her mouth and told her he'd only come to talk. Finally alone with her, he stood by the window and, in a soft voice, apologized for everything, for removing her box, for calling her unattractive, for every cruel word he'd said. Then he told her the truth he hadn't been able to say before because of his pride. He said Mi-onam wasn't unattractive at all. In his eyes, she was the most beautiful girl in the world. He promised that from now on, he'd never be the reason for her tears again. And with that, he left. Mi-onam stood frozen, not quite understanding what had just happened. Slowly, she turned toward the mirror. For the first time, she looked at herself not through fear, but through possibility, and what she saw surprised even her. She really was beautiful. A small, genuine smile appeared on her face. For the first time in her life, she felt that way about herself. The next day, she walked into school without her box. The entire hallway fell silent. Students stared at her, shocked and admiring. Menton couldn't hide his happiness when he saw her. He told her she looked amazing, placed his hand affectionately on her shoulder, and walked beside her through the school, playfully messing up her hair. The students around them watched with obvious jealousy. Later, Mi-onam thanked Zero for protecting her and always being there for her. While they talked, they noticed a popular, strikingly beautiful girl surrounded by her friends. Mi-onam asked who she was. She was told the girl's name was Vivian, famous throughout the school for her looks, but also known for being proud and distant. Nothing rebuilds self-esteem quite like public humiliation followed by a confession from the same guy who caused it, closure by cardiac arrest. Some time later, Mi-onam found out that Zero was fighting again. She rushed over and reminded him of his promise to change. Zero explained that some girls had been talking badly about Mi-onam behind her back, and he couldn't tolerate it. In front of everyone, he loudly declared that anyone who hurt Mi-onam would become his enemy. Frustrated, Mi-onam told him she didn't want any trouble. She just wanted peace. Zero looked at her and said that she looked even prettier when she was angry. As Mi-onam started to walk away, Zero grabbed her hand and said he wouldn't let anyone else claim her. Annoyed, she pulled her hand free. Afterward, Menton confronted Zero and asked what exactly he wanted from Mi-onam. Zero admitted that he'd bullied her in the beginning, but now he genuinely cared about her and wasn't backing down. Menton calmly replied that he cared about her too. Tension rose between them. Without saying it outright, both boys started competing with each other, each trying to prove he was the better choice for Mi-onam. The next morning, both boys showed up at her house to take her to school. Her father opened the door and eyed them both suspiciously. Both insisted that Mi-onam would go with them. Her father even offered to drive her himself. When Zero realized Mi-onam probably wouldn't choose him, he left before anything could be decided. In the end, Menton took her to school on his motorcycle. Seeing them arrive together, students started whispering that maybe they were dating. In class, The teacher announced an upcoming school trip and said every student would need a signed permission form from their parents. The whole class cheered with excitement. After school, Menton dropped Mi-onam home again, promising that wherever she wanted to go, he'd always take her there. His care made her feel deeply warm inside. Just then, her brother showed up and started teasing them both. Later, he told Mi-onam that Zero kept an eye on their house, while Menton came to pick her up every single day. He joked that two strong guys had clearly fallen for her. Laughing, Mi-onam told him to stop teasing her. That same night, walking into her room, she was startled to find Zero already there. She screamed and threatened to call everyone. Zero casually lay down on her bed and told her to go ahead and try. Just then, her brother knocked on the door. Zero hid under the blanket, and Mi-onam pretended to be asleep. Her brother grew suspicious, pulled back the blanket, and was shocked to find Zero staring back at him. Panic filled the room. Mi-onam quickly explained it was all a misunderstanding. Zero calmly said he'd only come to ask one question. He wanted to know what Mi-onam actually thought of Menton. Furious, Mi-onam threw him out of her room. The next day, during the school trip, Menton sat beside Mi-onam and told her how happy she made him. He said ever since she'd come into his life, everything had gotten brighter. He asked her to close her eyes. As soon as she did, he gently kissed her hand. Embarrassed, Mi-onam asked what he was doing. Shyly, Menton asked if the two of them could become more than friends. Mi-onam couldn't answer right away. Menton told her to take her time. Feelings don't change overnight. Eventually, Mi-onam agreed, and the two officially became a couple. During breakfast, Zero came and sat down with them. Coldly, Mi-onam told him to focus on his fiancée. Surprised, Zero asked how she even knew about that. Mi-onam said the whole school knew. Zero stood up in front of everyone and publicly announced that he didn't love his fiancée and would never marry her, ending the engagement right then and there. Humiliated, Vivian tried to save face by claiming she never wanted to marry him either. Afterward, Menton saw Zero and Mi-onam together and completely misunderstood the situation. He slapped Zero. The sudden conflict overwhelmed Mi-onam, and she fainted. Menton rushed her to the hospital. Ah yes, the classic love triangle resolution. Slap first, ask questions never. Faint conveniently right on cue. The next day, when she woke up, Menton was sitting beside her bed. The moment she saw him, Mi-onam apologized, explaining that what he'd seen was just a misunderstanding. She told him the entire story of what had happened with Zero. Hearing the truth, Menton's face lit up with childlike joy. Nervously, he asked, "So, you love me?" Shyly, Mi-onam nodded yes. Menton nearly jumped with happiness, unable to contain his excitement. Then, turning serious, he asked her to promise she'd try to stay away from Zero. Mi-onam gave him her word. Back home, her father saw photos of Mi-onam and Zero on social media. Upset, he called her and said she could have chosen a far better boy than a former gang leader who had once hurt her. Mi-onam explained again that it was all a misunderstanding, but her father's harsh words hurt her, and she quietly walked away. The next day at school, whispers spread because of the photos. Students said cruel things about her. But this time, Mi-onam tried not to let it affect her. Still, Menton couldn't stand watching anyone insult her. He confronted the students and warned them to stay quiet. Later, the teacher called both Zero and Mi-onam in. Disappointed, the teacher said she'd expected better behavior from Mi-onam. Mi-onam apologized and promised she'd keep her distance from Zero completely. As she walked out, Zero grabbed her hand and asked her to hear him out. Angrily, Mi-onam told him to stay out of her life because every time he showed up, all he brought was trouble. She left him standing there and went to join her friends and Menton. Her friends suddenly suggested she enter the upcoming beauty pageant. Mi-onam was shocked at first, but with everyone encouraging her, she eventually agreed. The competition would be between Mi-onam's team and popular girl Vivian's team. Both teams started training. Mi-onam's team wore yellow, while Vivian's team chose pink dresses. They trained hard for various events, including swimming. Mi-onam cheered on Menton with confidence, while Vivian cheered for Zero, reminding everyone that he was a strong swimmer. After practice, Zero stopped Mi-onam and apologized again. He explained that his engagement to Vivian had only happened because of a family arrangement. There were no real feelings between them. Then he honestly asked if she truly loved Menton. Mi-onam hesitated, admitting she wasn't entirely sure. But she said she respected the way Menton cared for her. Confidently, Zero said maybe Mi-onam was just denying her real feelings for him. Mi-onam called him ridiculous. Just then, Menton called her phone. She smiled and walked off, telling Zero plainly that she liked being with Menton. On competition day, the whole school buzzed with excitement. Vivian was fully confident her team would win. But unexpectedly, Mi-onam's team took first place. Everyone was shocked by the victory, especially Vivian. Mi-onam celebrated happily with Menton and her family. On the other side, Vivian's jealousy grew even more intense, and she started blaming Mi-onam for everything going wrong in her life. Turns out losing a beauty pageant to your rival is apparently grounds for attempted drowning, competitive spirit at its finest. The next day, Mi-onam went looking for Zero, but couldn't find him anywhere. Instead, she ran into Vivian, who coldly told her Zero was near the swimming pool. As soon as Mi-onam reached the pool, Vivian and her friends surrounded her. Without warning, they attacked her, accusing her of trying to steal Zero, and shoved her into the pool. Mi-onam struggled in the water, screaming for help, but the girls just laughed and kept filming her on video. Even after pulling her out, they hit her and threatened her to stay away from Zero. As they walked off, Mi-onam's face was covered in bruises, and she trembled with fear. Menton heard her screams and rushed over. He yelled at Vivian, warning her to stop. He took off his jacket and gave it to Mi-onam so she wouldn't be cold. But overwhelmed by embarrassment and emotion, Mi-onam walked off alone. She ended up in a forgotten corner filled with old furniture and a dusty mirror. Looking at her reflection, she saw the bruises on her face. All the old laughter, insults, and humiliation came rushing back. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She picked up a nearby paper bag and slowly placed it over her head, retreating once again behind the shield she used to depend on. Zero found her sitting alone and quietly approached. He gently removed the bag and saw her crying, bruised face. Anger flashed in his eyes. He asked who had done this to her, but Mi-onam couldn't answer. Crying, she said she'd hoped the outside world would be hopeful and beautiful, but instead it turned out cruel and terrifying. She said she wanted to go back to her room and shut herself away forever. Zero firmly told her she couldn't hide from the world. She had to face it. He promised he'd stand by her and protect her. He took her hand and walked her safely home. Seeing them arrive together, Menton grew jealous. Zero politely left. Menton asked where she'd been and why she hadn't answered his calls. Mi-onam said she was fine, but then brought up his aggressive behavior, telling him she absolutely hated violence. Menton explained he'd only acted that way because he couldn't stand watching her get hurt. Mi-onam told him she didn't want a love built on anger. Menton sincerely apologized, and Mi-onam forgave him. The next day, Zero found out what Vivian had done. Furious, he confronted her in front of everyone and showed her the recorded video. He publicly shamed her for humiliating Mi-onam and warned her that she'd crossed a line. He said she was lucky he didn't hit girls. If she'd been a guy, he wouldn't have held back. Vivian tried to defend herself, but the whole school had already seen the truth. With her pride shattered, Vivian screamed at Zero, saying she'd only done it because she loved him. How could he choose that unattractive girl over her? Coldly, Zero replied that the real ugly one was Vivian, especially after what she'd just done. He said he despised her now and walked away without looking back. Around this time, Mi-onam noticed a strange student watching her from a distance. His constant staring made her uncomfortable. Zero noticed it too and, without saying a word, started staying closer to her. Later, while leaving the parking lot, a car suddenly sped toward Mi-onam. Zero reacted instantly, pulling her out of the way and saving her. Furious and terrified, he grabbed the driver and started hitting him. In a panic, Mi-onam stopped him, reminding him how much she hated violence. Afterward, she gently cleaned the small cut on his hand. Zero smiled faintly, touched that Mi-onam was taking care of him. At that moment, he opened up about his past for the first time. He told her that as a child, he'd watched his older brother die in a car accident right in front of his eyes. He hadn't been able to save him. From that day on, anger became his shield. Mi-onam listened quietly and told him she didn't think he was a bad person. Deep down, he was kind. The two of them spent the rest of the day lightly joking around, and the tension between them softened considerably. When she got home, Menton was already waiting. He asked where she'd been and tried again to turn her father against Zero, warning that Zero was dangerous. Annoyed, Mi-onam went straight to her room. The next day, she spent time with Menton. Nervously, he asked her directly about her feelings. At first, Mi-onam tried to dodge the question with jokes, but Menton gently pressed. She admitted she couldn't clearly define her own feelings. Menton, hurt, said he'd give her time. But deep down, he knew Mi-onam couldn't completely ignore Zero. The two of them quietly finished out their day. That same night, Mi-onam once again found Zero in her room. Shocked, she asked what he was doing there. Casually, Zero asked where she'd been all day. Honestly, she told him she'd been with Menton. Zero simply said he'd learned what he needed to know and left. The next day, that same mysterious boy who'd been watching her for days approached her again. Zero aggressively stepped in front of him, but Mi-onam stopped him. The boy introduced himself and revealed a shocking truth. He'd gone to Mi-onam's old school. He'd been there the day, years ago, when Mi-onam confessed her feelings to that boy. He apologized for calling her unattractive back then. Then he revealed the real truth. Menton was the very boy Mi-onam had confessed to years earlier. He was the one who'd cruelly rejected her and let the bullying happen. Mi-onam felt like her entire world had shattered all over again. Zero quietly took her home. Along the way, she kept calling Menton, but he didn't answer. Later, Menton called back playfully, having no idea that Mi-onam now knew the truth. She asked to meet the next day. The next morning, Menton showed up happily, thinking Mi-onam was about to confess her love. Instead, she told him she knew everything. She said that years ago, he had destroyed her life. She had loved him, and he had cruelly rejected her.
She wanted to know why.
Menton admitted he'd always carried the guilt of what he'd done. He said he'd made a mistake, and afterward, he'd worked with her father to create chances to grow close to her again, hoping to fix what he'd broken. His confession hurt her even more. She felt like both Menton and her own father had manipulated her. Furious, she confronted her father. He admitted he'd only wanted Mi-onam to leave her room and start living her life again, that everything he'd done had come from fear and love. But Mi-onam felt betrayed and ran off to the beach in tears. Nothing says healthy family dynamics like your dad quietly recruiting your childhood bully as your boyfriend. Talk about playing the long game. Zero found her sitting alone by the sea. Mi-onam accused him too of being part of the plan. Gently, Zero said he'd know nothing about it. He explained that her father truly loved her and that Menton had probably acted out of guilt rather than cruelty. He told her she needed to stop running from her pain and face it. Slowly, she calmed down. When the two of them got back home, Menton saw them together and started fighting with Zero again. Mi-onam screamed at them to stop. Menton asked if she trusted Zero more than him. Honestly, Mi-onam replied that at least Zero had never lied to her. Just then, two men on a motorcycle approached and tried to attack Mi-onam with a glass bottle. Zero shielded her with his own body and got injured in the process. Menton chased after the attackers but got hit by a car and was seriously hurt. All three of them were rushed to the hospital. Mi-onam only had a small cut on her arm, but her heart felt incredibly heavy. She went to see Menton first and told him she forgave him. Meanwhile, Zero confronted Vivian, realizing she was behind the attack. He warned her that if she ever came near Mi-onam again, he'd never forgive her. Later, Mi-onam went to Zero's hospital room. She thanked him for always protecting her and helping her become stronger. Then, gathering her trembling courage, she confessed that she loved him. She asked if he loved her too. Zero avoided giving a direct answer and pretended to fall asleep. Confused and frustrated, Mi-onam left. She went to see Menton again. He sincerely apologized once more, admitting he truly cared about her, but said he'd respect whatever decision she made. The next day at school, Zero acted distant and kept avoiding Mi-onam, which hurt her deeply. Then Menton made a grand, public confession in front of the entire school, openly declaring his love for her. Gently, Mi-onam turned him down, telling him they should stay friends. Menton accepted her decision with dignity. He hugged her and told her that her happiness meant everything to him. Finally, Zero stepped forward. In front of the whole school, he confessed that he'd fallen in love with Mi-onam the very first moment he saw her face. He admitted that pride had made him act distant and cruel. Smiling, Mi-onam said she'd accept him, but on one condition: he had to give up violence forever. Without hesitation, Zero agreed. The entire school applauded as the two officially became a couple. Standing at a distance, Menton watched quietly, his heart heavy, but he'd grown mature enough to let her go. Once things settled, Mi-onam went over to Menton and told him not to be sad. She joked with him the way they used to, trying to lighten the mood. Around this same time, a gentle connection began forming between Menton and Mi-onam's friend Yojin, who had clearly liked Menton for a while and started helping him move forward. Meanwhile, Mi-onam and Zero walked home hand in hand. Gathering her courage, Mi-onam told her father that she and Zero were officially in a relationship. Her father was so shocked he nearly fainted. He looked at Zero like his entire world had just ended. He asked her if there really wasn't anyone else in the whole world for her to love. Dramatically, he tried to pull their hands apart. But Mi-onam firmly told him she loved Zero and wouldn't leave him. Eventually, her father agreed, but only under strict conditions. No going out without permission, no coming home late, and her brother would supervise every outing. To keep the peace, both of them accepted every condition. The next day, Zero took her out. The two of them laughed, took countless photos, and tried to enjoy their time together, while Mi-onam's brother awkwardly trailed behind them. At one point, Mi-onam distracted her brother and led him away, leaving Zero alone for a moment. That's when his former gang members showed up. They were furious with him for quitting the gang and abandoning the violent lifestyle. They knew Zero had promised Mi-onam he'd never fight again, so they started beating him. Zero didn't defend himself. He silently took every punch. When Mi-onam came back and saw his bleeding face, she panicked. Zero explained that he'd kept his promise and hadn't fought back. Her heart swelled with pride. But later, rumors twisted the entire story. Misunderstanding what happened, Mi-onam accused him of breaking his promise. Hurt and emotional, she slapped him, called him a liar, and in tears, ended the relationship and walked away. Menton overheard the whole thing. He asked Zero why he hadn't told Mi-onam the truth, that he'd only fought out of necessity. Quietly, Zero replied that he couldn't lose Mi-onam because he truly loved her. Later, Mi-onam's brother told her the full truth. When the gang attacked again, Zero had only fought to protect him. He'd had no choice but to defend himself. Realizing her mistake, Mi-onam was consumed with guilt. The next morning, she went to that quiet place where Zero liked to sit alone, and found him there. Without hesitation, she ran to him, crying, and apologized. She told him she loved him and never wanted to leave his side again. Zero also apologized for every moment he'd hurt, scared, or disappointed her. The two of them reconciled, and their relationship grew even stronger than before. The following day was Mi-onam's birthday. Her family and friends threw her a beautifully decorated celebration at home. Looking around, Mi-onam saw her father, her brother, Menton, Yojin, and Zero all gathered around her. She sincerely thanked everyone for being part of her life. For the first time, she truly felt loved and confident. That same night, Menton walked Yojin home. Under the quiet streetlights, he confessed his feelings to her. This time, Yojin didn't dodge the question. She smiled shyly and accepted him. Their own love story began gently, quietly, without any of the pain that had come before. And with that, the first chapter of Mi-onam's journey comes to an end. She was no longer the girl hiding behind a box. Now she stood confidently in her true form, surrounded by people who genuinely, wholeheartedly cared about her.